If you remember from lecture, what we had is we had some zinc and it was placed in direct contact with the copper sulfate. And the electrons transferred from this to this directly, and this became black and then it became red. What was happening is this was dissolving and it was going into the liquid, and then the blue, which is the copper, was receiving the electrons directly and becoming copper. So we have this scenario where we have the pitcher with the baseball, which is like the electron. It's throwing that ball to the catcher over here, and the catcher receives that and receives the electrons. The copper's receiving the electrons over here, and it's becoming solid copper. But what if we were to separate these by a significant distance so that the pitcher and the catcher are in two completely different compartments? The baseball is still going to get thrown, but we're going to sort of capture it in between the two, and we're going to sort of harvest the energy of this electron. So that's what we're going to be doing, and we're going to be separating these two separate reactions and prevent them from directly contacting each other, but we're still going to be producing the electrons in this scenario. So this is a lab where we're going to be creating some voltage, and we're going to be doing so with what's called a voltaic cell. We'll be getting into voltaic cells when we get into lecture, but this is a little bit of a preview. So here is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be setting this up. We're going to be drawing it right here, and then what I'd like you to do is to follow these steps and to draw down below in this space. So we're going to be having a filter strip. Here's the filter strip right here. And I'm going to draw two circles on each end with a pencil. I can use a pen as well. So here's going to be the one end over here. And here is the other circle over here. We'll be drawing this in just a minute. We're going to label one circle with zinc. So we're going to be placing our zinc over here. On the other side, we're going to be placing a Cu inside this circle for copper. We're going to connect this with a series of small dots that look like this. And place the labeled filter paper. We're going to put this on a piece of plastic wrap. And what we're going to do is we're going to be putting the zinc over here on top of the zinc. We're going to be placing the copper on top of the copper. Now we're going to be placing zinc sulfate over here, and we're going to be placing some copper sulfate over here, and they're going to each remain separate. So here's the pitcher over here, and here's the catch over there, but actually they're now going to be in separate compartments, in separate containers. So we actually can't get the electron to get transferred between those two. But our final step is we're going to be connecting these two with a different material, and that's going to be called sodium nitrate. So here's the sodium nitrate, and we're going to connect the dots, and then we're going to measure the voltage that exists between them. But I'd like to draw this scenario and in what we're going to be doing with this. So if you can draw this like here, and I'm going to draw this at an angle. So it's going to look like a parallelogram, but you can imagine we're looking at this from afar, and we're looking at it from an angle. So we have the zinc that's over here, and we have the copper on the other side. Again, we're going to have our dots that are looking just like that. Okay, so we're going to have the zinc on one side, the copper on the other side. And what we're going to do is we're going to be putting some zinc sulfate over here, and it is ZnSO4. And on this side, we're going to be putting the copper sulfate. What we had done in the previous lab is we had taken the copper sulfate, which is this blue liquid, and we contacted the zinc directly to there. And again, we have this direct transfer of the electrons. Now we're trying to keep the electrons in, not from immediately transferring, but we want them to transfer over a period of space like this. So here's our zinc and here's our copper. The electrons are literally going to be jumping across from here to here. And I'll show how that happens when we get the voltage meter. So we're going to be adding the copper sulfate over to here. When that is in place, again, the zinc is going to be this metal, and here's what the zinc looks like, and here is what the copper looks like. And we're going to connect it with the salt bridge. The salt bridge is going to be formed up of sodium nitrate, and that's what these dots represent. So if you know anything about electricity, we need to have what's called a complete circuit. We actually only have part of the circuit because we want the electrons to travel in a complete circle. So what we're going to then do is we're going to bring a voltmeter, and I'm going to represent this voltmeter. Here's what the voltmeter looks like, okay? And we're going to represent this as just a capital V. And as I unwind this, you'll see that we have these electrodes, and I'm going to tap one of the electrodes to the zinc and one of them to the copper over here. And what that's going to do is that is then going to complete our electrical circuit. We're going to have a complete circle in this scenario, and we're going to be able to get the movement of electrons. So what's going to happen is, if you can write these reactions down below, the zinc in this reaction is going to start off as the zinc solid, and it is going to lose 2 of its electrons. What's going to happen is that zinc will then dissolve in the zinc sulfate. So since the zinc, which is neutral, is going to be losing 2 of the electrons, it becomes 2 positive. Now over on the other side, what's going to happen is here's the copper. It's going to lose the 2 electrons. The 2 electrons are going to travel then through the electrodes. Remember, this is connected to the electrode. They're going to travel through the electrode into the voltmeter, and they'll jump across to the other side over here. So the 2 electrons will then come out the other side. What's going to happen is those 2 electrons will then react with the blue copper sulfate that's sitting over here. Remember, copper is going to be a 2 positive charge, and it's going to be a 2 negative charge. So the copper is sitting there as copper sulfate, and the 2 electrons will then jump onto the copper, and it's going to create solid copper on the other side. So how is that different from the previous experiment? Well, if you remember, what we had is we had a direct contact. This zinc was placed into the copper, and the electrons were transferred directly from the zinc to the copper. Now what we're doing is we're taking the electrons and we're having them travel through the voltmeter first before they enter into the copper sulfate to make more copper. How is that useful? How is that effective? Well, we now have the movement of electrons. And if you can imagine having some type of device like a fan or a light or something to be powered, the electrons will then go through this device and make the light glow or the motor move, which we'll do in a future lab as well. So what we have is we have 2 reactions that are taking place, and these are going to be taking place simultaneously. Over here, the zinc is giving up the electrons, so this is going to be an oxidation reaction. This is where things are going to get oxidized over here. The copper on the other side is receiving the electrons. It's getting the electrons. It's becoming more negative, so this is becoming reduced. So again, here's the pitcher, and here is the catcher on the other side. And in electrical terminology, this is the source of the electrons. And this is the source of these negatively charged things. This is called the anode. If you remember anion, an anion is a negative ion. So this makes this side of our electrical circuit the negative side. It's the source of the negatives. Now, an electron is negative. What's going to happen to a negative when it's next to another negative? It's going to get repelled. And the negative electron will be attracted towards the other side, which is going to be the positive side. The negative electrons will be attracted towards the positive side. And this is called the cathode. So here's our circuit, and the next part we're going to go ahead and assemble everything, and then we'll see how much voltage that we can create. But again, what we have is we have two separate reactions that are going to be happening simultaneously. We have the zinc over here losing the electrons, and they're going to travel through the voltmeter, and the copper over here is going to receive those electrons and going to be creating solid copper over here.